What if the factors that fuel human trafficking aren't just forces out there, but right here, shaping the world we live in every day? Here, we take an unflinching look at how cultural influence, hidden pain, and exploitative systems contribute to the demand for commercial sex. This isn't just another awareness podcast about a social issue. It's about people, the human stories of those harmed, those healing, and those waking up to their role in change. Welcome to the Demand Disruption Podcast.
So a few years ago, we were in a meeting and we were talking about a lot of our interactions with the public, and people were talking about human trafficking. And we came to a conclusion, and it may sound strange, but it was probably the most effective way to talk about human trafficking and have people understand it is to stop talking about human trafficking, the effect, and focus on the contributing factors, the causes. How does somebody get to that point of vulnerability, and how is that exploited? Because we share a lot of those contributing factors. And so as we consider that, and as we consider what that looks like, we've got to define some pretty basic things, like sex trafficking itself to start with. Sex trafficking is when somebody is induced into a labor or a sex act through means of some sort of control or manipulation. The definition of force, fraud, or coercion comes along with that, unless it's a minor, in which case you don't have to prove any of that. So that's sort of the baseline of what we're talking about with sex trafficking. As we talk about it today, Phuong, we're going to start a little bit foundational, and then go general, and then bring it down to a specific conversation.
I actually love this opportunity to be able to do that on our podcast, because one part of our podcast is really wanting to make sure that we're having conversations that aren't being had, I guess, in our work, a line of work, especially with our organization focusing a lot more on the demand side of fighting trafficking. And so, it's awesome that we get this space to do that. But, we can't really, go too deep into talking about all of these issues that are related to demand without laying that foundational work that you're talking about when it comes to what is human trafficking really. Our organization, we like to say that, it's an effect, not a cause. So as we talk about, those outlets, as we talk about, the causes of, how this becomes an effect, it's just some things for our viewers to consider, where those intersections are that they might see, some of this impact in their community, and maybe even think as they hear, what we're going to talk about in this episode, how they can get involved or what they could be looking out for. Yeah. So I think, we went through that definition of what is human trafficking. I think the next question would be like, where do we see trafficking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so starting really, you've got to kind of divide a line, and it'll be labor and sex trafficking are the most common forms of trafficking, and that's what people typically talk about. Labor trafficking, while we don't deal with it, is very important to acknowledge it, especially for a few reasons. The area of the world that we're in, like we serve in Southeast Texas area, of course, we're national with the work that we do for a lot of our partners, but there is a very specific labor trafficking concern down in this part of our world, of our nation. And so labor trafficking, and then sex trafficking, of course, what we work with. When I hear sex trafficking, I think of labor and sex trafficking, because it really is both, right? Isn't it? And these things take place in these outlets. I've tried to normalize outlets as much as I can when I'm talking. I know that you have also, because outlets reminds us that this is a place where this awful thing is taking on that commercial gain. This is an outlet, just like you'd go to a grocery store, or you'd go to a technology place to buy something. These are outlets. And the outlets, there's a lot of them, but really if we look at, before we get into the physical space, we have to kind of back out and go to cyberspace. There are outlets to buy sex or some sexual gratification online, right? Chat rooms, ways to do, whether it's something on OnlyFans we've talked about before, or webcam. But really, coming into the physical world, a lot of people skip this next one. an outlet where human trafficking happens with regularity are strip clubs. I mean, it is kind of a joke in our society. Yeah, well, whatever. Strip clubs, no big deal.
Yeah.
The sad truth of the matter is, study after study will tell you that the women that are in these places, they have an overwhelming percentage of them have a history of sexual abuse as a child, as a drug or alcohol dependency. Like it is a terrible existence to try to survive day to day on. And many of these places are used as a way to sell sex and buy sex. It's not just, we laugh about things like a lap dance or that. No, that's not the case. And we've talked with buyers who tell us their first sex purchase was in a strip club. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it needs to be brought into the realm of the rest of all the other outlets. And so as we understand that, we understand other outlets like street prostitution, for example. Here in Houston, Bissonnette for the longest time, the Blade, the Track. For the longest time, that was a street in Houston that was one of the busiest in the state, if not the nation, for prostitution, trafficking, and that sort of thing. I know that I've been out there in a number of capacities, really just volunteering, talking with the women, with some of our partners like Elijah Rising and others, and then others to monitor buyer behavior. And it's heartbreaking in a society to see a row of 8 to 10 cars lined up, and every one of them are just like they're going through the drive-through. It's truly sad, and it's a bigger testimony to where that brokenness can bring somebody to either be consumed or to consume. So when we look at that, we then think, okay, another outlet. What's another one that we think of? Well, illicit massage businesses. People are like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I know about those. Well, maybe not, because brothels are particularly awful, but also regimented in their business model. There are so many of them because they are treated like a business. And as an outlet, when we learn more about those places, we learn more about back to forced fraud or coercion, the way that women become trapped in that life, especially when they were considering they were going to come to America to do something else, maybe manual labor, maybe be in the service industry. But instead, when they got here, their visas were taken. They don't have their passports. They don't know anybody. They've been told not to trust the police, which lines up with possibly the culture they're coming from. Mm-hmm. And so they are trapped in this life, saying that their traffickers wanting them to work off of a debt that they owe for bringing them to America. That same thing, a debt they will never pay off because there's always more debt being added to it. That's another outlet. The one that we don't hear much about, but we definitely have an issue with down here in Houston, are cantinas. We're not talking about papacitos. Like we're not talking about a place you would ever want to step into if you didn't know better. In fact, from the street, you may think these places are closed or wonder why anybody's got a car there because they're just dilapidated, right? But not all of them, but a lot of them are. Essentially, these cantinas are like bars. And in these bars, as you come in, you're in this engagement with their management, maybe a bartender, but he's the one who runs in front of the house and handles things. And then there are these cantineras, like women who are waitresses. And they are women who are anything but waitresses. They're being trafficked. They're exploited. And they'll come and sit and have to drink a beer with you. And then from there, you go into the back room. You pay a lot of fees to get back there. And it's an awful, awful exploitation experience. So those are some of the outlets we talk about. So having laid that groundwork, I think it is also important that we look at domestic versus international.
Right.
Okay. And I think that's probably the last part of our groundwork we can lay, and then we can zoom back out. The domestic versus international thing, I think there's a perception that the majority of people trafficked in America were smuggled in and brought over the border, Mexico border, California, New York, whatever. And while that is true quite a bit, the majority of trafficked individuals were born here or domestic.
Yeah.
That is a shock to a lot of people. So this line between international and domestic trafficking, I think the more we understand that, the more we can make responsible choices or put pressure on decision makers in our government and in our local government to make those choices and to really shine a light on the things that are happening, those injustices. So yeah, that's kind of our rundown, right? That's That's the fundamentals of it.
To add on to that too, I think there's this aspect when people hear about human trafficking, they're thinking like, oh, it's in these other countries. It's happening in these really impoverished countries. It's not happening in the United States. But really, you just talked about a couple of different outlets yourself that you volunteered at, that you were boots on the ground, talking to women that have been exploited. And these are women that are local.
Yeah.
These are women that, are born here. In my previous work, I was a teen trafficking victim case manager, and most of my caseload were young girls that were born and raised here. And so that's just a layer I kind of wanted to address and peel back a little bit.
That's important.
But I think, too, it's also a good segue into talking about, like, who could be trafficked.
Yeah.
Because I think as an organization that focuses on the demand, and we talk a lot about the demand, and we'll elaborate more on what that really means, of course. But as an organization, we don't really interact in that way with victims. But we can't go into this episode without really just touching on it briefly about like who can be impacted by this, who can be trafficked. And really, first, I think it's that, yes, like anyone can be trafficked. And we've seen this, because we've seen this in the stories that have come out. Survivors, overcomers that have shared, and they've, come from every sort of background. But we can't deny, of course, too, that there are vulnerabilities. There are marginalized communities where this type of exploitation can be a bit more prevalent. And so we don't want to spend too much on our own definition and, what our experiences are. We really want to be able to hear specifically from a survivor leader. And so I think for us, we talk about demand, we talk about pornography and like how it impacts buyers and how buyers get to the point of arrest. And you'd think as our organization is focused on this part, survivors of trafficking might be like the people that would least support us. But actually, we have many survivor and overcomer leaders that really see like the importance of the message that we're trying to bring across and support us. And so, and partner with us. And so, I know you have a quote from a survivor leader that we've worked really close with.
Yes, we have done quite a bit with the survivor leader. Rhonda Kirkendall she's just a force of nature. There's no two ways about it. She's the Human Trafficking Task Force Director with Fort Bend's Anti-Trafficking Collective.
Mm-hmm.
We are a part of that as well, proud partners of that. Fort Bend County does some great work in this fight. So I asked her, and she gave me this definition. And I love that it starts the way that you were saying it. Anyone can be trafficked. That was the first thing she said. And a little background, Rhonda's powerful story that she has shared many times is really her own story about being a familial trafficking. She was trafficked in a familial way. And as hard as that is to listen to, it really does create a whole different bold print when we say anyone can be trafficked. So let's take a look at what Rhonda said. She said, anyone can be trafficked. With the advent of social media and online access, anyone with a vulnerability can become a target, regardless of race, religion, gender identity, or socioeconomic status. Traffickers don't discriminate. They exploit vulnerabilities. And the truth is, we all have vulnerabilities. But those with multiple vulnerabilities, such as poverty, prior abuse, unstable housing, or lack of support systems, they face significantly greater risk. That's why it's not just important, but absolutely critical to focus our prevention and intervention efforts on marginalizing and at-risk communities. It's deeply disturbing when sometimes organizations choose to center their efforts solely around how their children, meaning children in their community, might be trafficked, while ignoring the harsh truth that traffickers are actively seeking out children from hard places, those already suffering from trauma, abuse, or neglect. These children aren't just at risk, they're being targeted. And in far too many cases, what is presented as a promise of a better life turns into unimaginable exploitation. Now, recognizing this reality isn't about excluding one group or another. It's about equity, accountability, and ensuring that children and adults most at risk are not left behind. Anything less is dangerously out of touch and is a missed opportunity. We knew when we were talking about this question, just like you said, we answer that question a lot. We have this discussion. But our one of our basic tenets is that our job is not to be a voice for the voiceless survivors. It is to listen to what the survivors are saying and amplify them. And that powerful message, I think, covered so much in Rhonda's discussion, because she talked about children, she talked about adults, but she talked about things that really are these awful multipliers when it comes to vulnerability. And that's a lot of the societal issues. That's a lot of social policy that doesn't reach into some of the communities that it really should be designed for. To know that that's a reality requires us, and I mean that collectively as an anti-trafficking community, requires us to consider those things before we act. And in considering those, ask if we can't, then who can, and how do we support that? So I was very grateful to read that. I think when we talk about all this, we've got to go down the road of demand factors. We have got to talk about what that looks like. What does demand factors mean to you when you hear the factors that lead to demand?
I think, well, first, I kind of want to give that context of the word demand.
Okay.
Because I think when we're talking about demand for human trafficking, we're, if not the only one of the few that actually give context to it. And talking about it in just simple economics, when you have, a high demand for something, supply has to equal. And so for us, that supply is unfortunately the exploitation of women or exploitation of victims. Mm-hmm. And so what is contributing to those exploitation of victims? It's all of the aspects of culture that we've talked about in previous episodes, and that will go into this one, of like consumerism, but as well as the rampant use of pornography, how technology plays into the availability of this content, illicit sexual content that unfortunately is being available more and more to younger audiences. And so we have this culture now where younger audiences are growing up with this exposure that can lead to the demand for human trafficking, the demand for needing, of being on that escalation dynamic where they go from viewing pornography to going to one of those outlets that we're talking about and exploiting an individual. Yeah. And so that's the context of demand that we are always kind of continuing as an organization to help define for the people that follow us, for the communities that we're trying to educate. And I feel like before working in, anti-trafficking work and working on the survivor side, we're always trying to define what human trafficking looks like. We still are in a sense, right? But I think for us as an organization that is defining demand, we're seeing with technology, with AI, there's so many things that are new that are coming out that, is showing more points of exposure that we are constantly also trying to learn and to share with our communities about.
And with that explanation, you mentioned pornography. Like we talk about it a lot. Sorry, I know, get used to it, right? We talk about it a lot. It's accessible, but it's also invisible, meaning it can be done in such a way where other people don't see it. So it doesn't have this oversight, so to speak, that anything more openly consumed would have. I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about consuming it, what behaviors we begin to act out, and even before that, what thoughts we begin to internalize, and how not even realizing we're harming ourselves, not even realizing the thing we're consuming is leading us to something else, is the same dynamic of not even realizing we're harming others. We're harming people that are in our relationships. We're either distancing ourselves or we're acting out in a way because of something that's influencing us. I mean, it really does make me think of like this consumerism, and we are consuming as a nation, as a world. I could talk specifically about our nation for a number of reasons, but we're consuming this justification, objectification cocktail, this mixed drink. And it's intoxicating us in a way where, not unlike alcohol, parts of our decision-making are altered. Parts of our brain are altered, are adjusted. And unfortunately, we can't just say, well, that's an adult's choice. This is across the board becoming the rule, not the exception, for children to come in contact with. Like, we don't like kids in the bars. Like, I'm not going to a bar and saying, okay, kid, Johnny, sit over there and don't watch daddy drink. Like, That's not healthy. That's not a healthy place. We have laws to keep that from happening. Yet this cocktail, this consumption, is there for somebody who doesn't have the logic capability to know that, okay, not only is this bad for me, but I should stop because whatever's going to happen. They can't think in terms of consequence. It is, unlike alcohol, it doesn't have a weird taste. It is weird to look at first, but there is something inherently in us that sex is a part of us being sexual beings, even as a child with no point of reference. And so it's tragic to think about that and just think about how we don't let children with access to this controlled substance of alcohol, but kids are seeing graphic, awful pornography in these situations that are changing their brain as though they consume something else. And we carry that right into our adulthood. And that is the part that we don't talk enough about. We say kids are resilient. I say, no, kids are absorbent. Don't think of them as like a spring. Think of them as a sponge. You pick up a sponge and you squeeze it, it'll spring back, right? Mm-hmm. That looks resilient. But then get that sponge wet. And if you're looking at it, you can't tell it that it's soaked up anything until you actually make contact with it, connect with it, touch it. And even then, you don't know exactly what they've consumed. Kids are very much the same way. And so it's kind of the difference between, I want us to get away from this, kids are resilient, because in some ways they are. But for the most part, we got to remember they're absorbent. What they're being resilient against is still in there. And we've got to help them understand it in a way that's healthy.
I think too, when we talk about like demand factors, we also have to consider like what are the people in our community struggling with in 2025, right? Like, anger, loneliness. These are factors, I think, in our day-to-day lives that we don't really consider, especially like from like a mental health or even like just an overall holistic health perspective. Like how could we be, addressing some of these issues, because there is a correlation, right? And I think it goes into a little bit of like the assumptions, or like, what's normalized in our day-to-day life when it comes to porn usage, or the tolerance when it comes to consuming this type of material. Because you hear that a lot, where it's like, I'm sure you've heard many these excuses, at the point of arrest, where you're talking to a man.
Oh, pick one. I've heard
right, it. Right. Like I was lonely, or like I've been working a lot, and I just, I thought I'd just come to this place to, relax or something like that. And, like to me, it's a deeper issue that we could be doing better as people in our communities. Not even just Joe and Phuong working at an anti-trafficking organization, like Joe and Phuong in our communities in Pearland, in Cyprus. Like how could we be coming around, people that are struggling in our day-to-day lives a little bit more, so that this isn't an outlet that they go to, so that, the normalization of commercial sex isn't such a rampant thing that, that the pornography industry is making $2 billion something a year off of.
I'm reminded of an extremely powerful interview we had with Brian earlier in this season. Mm-hmm. And the contrast between him feeling alone and really just insecure about his worth and what he was, drove him to behavior that he was able to overcome because he was in community with people that helped him understand, no, you're not alone. No, you're not less than. It was this incredible arc that we all go through to some degree. We all struggle with those internal struggles, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that is. Unfortunately, we self-medicate. And sometimes it's a bowl of ice cream. Sometimes it's a half a pound of brisket. Okay, a pound of brisket. It's none of your business. I don't want to talk about it, okay?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's pornography. Sometimes it's drugs. Sometimes it's alcohol.
Yeah.
When we are acting out to try to squash that internal struggle, then that's where the red flags are. And if we're in community with people, to your point, we had that connection. If there was an openness, if men, let me just draw the line, if men could just talk to other men, like 10 years ago talking to me, none of this would have come out of my mouth. Like, I'm Joe, I can handle it. Whatever you got, I can take it times 10, whatever. There was this, I needed to always be this strength. I needed to be where I was never vulnerable, all of these things. And that's not strength. That's hiding. That's weakness. And unfortunately, we've defined it in such a way, not just men, but in general, where if I ask for help, I'm bailing or I'm not doing as well as they are. That community is so important that you're talking about, especially when we're talking about children or early exposure to something that can put you on a path, this consumption, to where now your reward-seeking behavior gets skewed and now you're seeking something else that's not in line with your beliefs and values and is not healthy for you or other people. Mm-hmm. So all of this we're talking about, kind of that whole absorbency thing. What you experience in your childhood, if it's not resolved, you're going to carry into your adulthood. And carrying something like that into your adulthood is just, it's detrimental because then the way you handle certain conflict, certain things that are barriers in your life, the acting out behavior becomes pervasive. Like it is what you default to. You're almost not even deciding anymore. It's automatic. It's just not even a decision. I tell guys that are struggling with porn that very same thing. So now think about that. That was micro as a person, right? As a child becoming an adult, becoming those struggles. That's that micro. Think about the macro. How many people is that happening for? Well, we have ways to measure that, and there are quite a few ways to measure that. But if we look at the billions of downloads on one porn site in a year, and however many porn sites there are, then the consumption rate is a torrent. We are consuming this cocktail. We're drinking so much of it that it, as a culture, is going to manipulate our thinking, the way our brain works, the way our interaction is, our inhibitions in some settings, just not unlike the way alcohol would do that. And if we realize that, then we realize the thing that we're seeking, we're acting out to acquire, that also becomes reduced. It becomes manipulated to a purpose that is, again, not in line with our beliefs and values. If I'm struggling with pornography and I'm consuming a lot of that, right? And I'm seeing that, and at some point, the escalation dynamic, other things that we've seen in studies tells us, okay, I've seen it, now I kind of want to be around it. I mean, this isn't enough anymore. Well, then we see that acting out behavior. Then we see that happening in a way where it escalates. So knowing that and realizing that there are cultural norms now that we're just not intercessory enough with. We're not saying, wait a second, this is not just bad for kids, it's not just harming kids, it's not just harming people who watch it. We are setting a course for an entirely inebriated culture seeking rewards that are harmful to others. I mean, to put that specifically in a dating situation, if I'm watching pornography and then I have a girlfriend and this pornography consumption has been over years and it's really something that's an issue that I don't talk about with other people and I haven't gotten help for it. Now I've got a girlfriend. Is it any wonder why teen dating violence has skyrocketed over the last 15 years? Mm-hmm. Where we've seen divorce happen. So we're seeing, not unlike with somebody who is an alcoholic in a relationship, their behavior harming others and harming the intimacy and connection. We see the same thing in our culture with this type of issue. And it's such a contributing factor. Remember, we haven't said one thing about trafficking since we started. I didn't say your kid's probably going to get trafficked, and here's why. We've talked about contributing factors that touch all of our lives and then culminate when there's enough of a combination of vulnerability and disenfranchisement and all of those things, then that can become trafficking. But if it doesn't become trafficking, you still experience all those hardships.
Kind of just goes back to a little bit of like the beginning of the episode where we were talking about how human trafficking is in effect. And these are the causes that come into play. And I think too, there's also that added layer kind of just bringing it back out a little bit more too, is technology and like, the influencer culture and how everything, not only is it on demand, but it's digestible in 90 seconds or less.
Yeah. Yes.
And you have now this whole kind of subsection of, social media where you have influencers that are promoting themselves in this way. They're promoting themselves in a way where they're an outlet for, men, most of them are men that would reach out and solicit things from them. And, we talked, here and there about OnlyFans and how like that is become rampant, not only rampant in how it's being exposed to younger audiences, but then also how that life is also glamorized. And so, it's hard to say it like this, but it's like human trafficking, it's that effect. There's a lot of things that we have to worry about too on top of that, right? That can impact, parts of our life that we not even realized.
Yeah. I think about this river. Like, I don't know why this in this conversation, I'm just coming up with all these analogies for whatever reason. I hope they're easy to follow. For a while, water goes down a canyon or goes down an outlet, and the shape of it dictates the flow of the water. But then over time, what happens? The flow of the water dictates the shape. We have such a torrent of content. But in 90 seconds, if it's 94 seconds, not interested, TLDR or whatever, like I'm guilty of that. I get in trouble all the time. My wife's like, no one's going to read that. I'm like, well, I don't care. I got it out. And that was the most old man thing I said that day. But it's true. And if we realize that, and we realize that there is this accompanying justification, like you were talking earlier about using expressions like, oh, this helps me relax, or this or that. It made me think of the alcohol comparison we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like people drink alcohol so that they don't have the anxiety oftentimes, and it becomes a problem. Other things that say I have too much stress. I have heard probably hundreds of times from buyers, and that's not even an exaggeration, that, well, pornography, I have a lot of stress at work, or, to relax a little. They're associating this with a way to not feel what they were feeling, whatever that was. And while we don't allow that to be the end excuse, we love that as a starting point, because now we start talking about, well, tell me about, what do you mean by stress? Well, what's stress? Well, work, or, well, my relationship. And it unfolds where they just give you an explanation of things in their life that are in conflict with themselves. And while it's sad to hear, we could take the trafficking and sex buying part of it, and the reason that we're talking, take the handcuffs off and just sit down, have a beer and some wings. And so many people would give the same reasons, the same stressors, the same parts of their life where they turn to this thing, buying sex, again, back to the alcohol theme, something so I don't have to feel the thing I'm feeling. We repeat this a lot in our conversations because it is such a common theme. And it goes back to a lot of the points that you were making earlier. I think about access. I'd mentioned this earlier. We don't let kids just reach out and grab alcohol, right? It's tricky because we live in a society where there's freedom of speech, freedom of choice. We have our liberties, and we should. When we're consuming, though, we always have to come back to that question. Am I consuming, or am I being consumed?
Right.
Have you ever there's like the death scroll on your phone, and it's like 11 o'clock at night, and you don't know why you're looking at each?
The kids these days call it brain rot.
Oh, yeah. Really? Okay.
That's what I was told. Correct me if I'm wrong.
The kids that are suffering the brain rot are renaming things. Okay, I guess I'll go with that. Brain rot, but it is. It's just that, and then 40 minutes have gone by.
Mm-hmm.
That's defaulting to a behavior because of the evening or whatever. Take that and apply it to all the things we're talking about. It's unconscionable to think somebody would buy sex and be this absolute fuel for human trafficking. That's not what they're experiencing. They're experiencing the next stage in what their escalation is. Mm-hmm. And whether it's scrolling on their phone at night or right there while their wife's or husband's sitting right next to them and for an hour they don't talk, whatever that is, it is a behavior that is a default. And when we understand that, then we understand we've normalized things in our society and we're acting out on them in a way that is almost involuntarily.
Right. And I think we talked a lot about like the consumerist part, the micro to macro. I want you to kind of touch a little bit more on your experiences speaking with men at the point of arrest, hearing some of these stories of how men get to that point. Our organization, you really actually came up with something called the escalation dynamic that kind of helped people to understand that question that you asked earlier, like how does a man, start off, being stressed from work, end up at the point of arrest?
The escalation dynamic was created after about the 300, 400, I don't know, I'll lose track. I probably use a different number all the time. People are like, this guy's making it up. After about the 300 or 400 person that I met at the point of arrest, I had a conversation with a guy, and it just hit me like a thunderbolt when I got home. I was like, what happened today? Because it just keeps coming up. And what I realized was that I was hearing commonalities. Now, not exactly the same things, but I was hearing commonalities in these guys' stories. But my brain works like a timeline. And I was thinking, okay, but these commonalities aren't just common. They're escalating. The severity is happening more and more. And so it looks a little something like this. The first two stair steps are pornography. So it's softcore pornography, and then hardcore is the next stair step. The reason those two are kind of separated, it's, okay, I'm seeing this. I'm consuming it, visually, right? Mm-hmm. The softcore leap to hardcore, softcore has quite a bit of abuse and verbal or otherwise to women in it, hair pulling, yelling, whatever, name calling. And I asked the guys that I'm talking to, I'm like, why do you think that is? And they have no idea. They're not really engaged. I say, so what you may not realize is the most compulsive combination, I think, compelling combination, even addicting combination of our brain function can be for men, especially aggression and sex. And when you combine those two, the part of the brain remembers it, and it remembers it well, and it seeks it out, and it changes reward-seeking behavior like we've been talking about. And so I'm going from this, I like sex and nude women, whatever, to it's mixed with something more graphic and aggressive. And that escalation within the pornography viewing of itself continues. A lot of the guys we talk to are not watching the same stuff they started watching. There's always this escalation. Mm-hmm. But those first two stair steps are like, okay, I've seen it. And then it's almost like, okay, I want to kind of engage with it somehow. I want to be around it. Well, the next two stair steps are webcam and strip clubs, two very common ways to interact in this simulated sexual way with another person. There's still justification. I'm still the consumer. Hey, I'm paying for it, so I'm also justified. And this is just a transaction. There are all the things that are built into that consumption mindset. And the consumption mindset will indulge until it has to reach another plateau to overcome. And so that plateau could be, okay, yeah, all right, I've seen it. I've kind of been around it. I'm going to strip clubs. But man, I really want to experience it. I want the experience. I want next level. And that escalation will take them to maybe a back room of the strip club or illicit massage, something where they're going to pay an illicit massage business for a sexual act or street prostitution. And now we're back to the outlets, right? Now we're talking about cantinas. We're talking about hotel meetups. That is the escalation dynamic. And the reason we talk about it so much, because it's really pretty simple once you go through it. Yeah. But the connections are missed all the time. And the reason I know that is because men who go through our class and our trainings and our program, they say, I never realized they were connected. You just described one guy who wasn't even listening when I first started talking. He was belligerent. He said, when I was done, you just described the last 4 years of my life. So that's really the escalation dynamic in that segment. So in this context of what we're talking about, I'm picturing guys. I can see their faces right now. I really can. And what I realize is It's not unlike somebody who has such an alcohol problem that they need intervention. And when you first intervene with them, they are going to feel remorse and regret to some degree, but they're also not going to be able to process most of what you're telling them. Like at the point of arrest, for example, we're very specific. I want to cover these 3 things, and I just want to get to the next conversation because I want to establish a relationship. This all comes back to humanity, everything we're doing, all of it, because we're acting out in a way that is stigmatized, and rightfully so, because we're hurting others. But whatever that thing is, at the core of that is the human being who's suffering and acting out. Now, I always feel like I have to give this disclaimer. Most of the guys that we talk to are receptive. Some of them are monsters. It's just true. There's some people that they become monsters. You don't, like, buyers aren't born, they're made. Monsters aren't born, they're made. And so wonderful, caring people aren't just born, they're made through relationships and through caring and nurturing. And it's hard to sit across from a person that you know is not going to not only understand anything you're saying or accept any of it, but is in such a place of brokenness that there must have been a heartbreaking string of issues that happened with them to that point. And so the intervention is necessary. Sometimes it changes. We had some friends of ours from a partner church of ours that came out on, we trained them, and they came out on one of our interventions. They only got to see one guy that night because for whatever reason, for about 2.5 hours, we only had one. That's rare. The one that we had was absolutely unhinged in terms of his defensiveness, saying that we're doing something to it. It was just really a strange. But when he left, I told the guy, I said, that's why we don't measure success here. This is not where the success happens. This is where the beginning of the willingness to do the work. And with work comes practice, practice comes application, application comes evaluation, and then applying the things that are good and the things that aren't, getting rid of them. And then the success comes. And so I kind of was telling them that because on one hand, I was like, well, that was exciting, I'm sure. They just saw somebody really losing it. But on the other hand, I didn't want them to feel like they failed by not seeing progress that night. Well, 2 days later, we get an email from that guy because we reach out as a follow-up. The guy who's screaming at us saying that we're persecuting him, we're targeting him, all of that. He said that he didn't sleep the night before he wrote that email because he was trying to come to terms with the things we were telling him about trafficking, men's decisions to buy sex, and what that acting out behavior does in terms of the grand scheme of things, the macro. We're back to the society. And he said, I have never once thought about that.
Wow.
And I hate, I have spoken many times about hating child molesters and people who would harm children. And I've never thought of myself as harming somebody.
Mm.
He was so drunk with his own justification and misdirection so that he could function the way that he was functioning. He was telling himself that these women need money and I'm not mean to them, so I'm one of the good guys. And that justification is a dangerous thing because then you start, I'm not a mean drunk. Like, I keep coming back to that, but the parallels are things that we have to consider because if we're going to take something in, whether it's pornography or alcohol, and it's going to change the way our brain works, the way we function, the way we act, the way we treat others, all of that, the decisions that we make, we have to consider it as a drug. We have to consider it as a foreign substance that we are consuming that's going to change the way we behave. And ultimately, if we don't evaluate that, it'll change who we are. And it all comes back to identity. When somebody connects with somebody and you can get back to their identity of who they are, that purpose changes. They're not seeking something that's damaging anymore. And when that purpose changes, their legacy changes. That is the whole part of what we're trying to do with the escalation dynamic is understand how did they get from pornography to buying sex and all the stair steps in between, but only so that we can then begin the work to say, but this isn't you, is it? This is what you did, this is not who you are. And if they can begin doing that work and show that it isn't who they are, and they get some of that reconciliation with their true beliefs and values, their humanity begins to come back and their identity is rediscovered. That's the loop. That's why we don't talk about trafficking as much as people might think we should. We talk about the contributing factors because no matter who you are listening to this or talking right now, you have internal struggle. You have things that are a barrier. And what we do to self-medicate can be so detrimental. And that's really an elaborate way to work in the escalation dynamic, I think. And I know I went on a run there, but it's because it's all so connected to our identity and the contributing factors in our life that we can identify as, no, that's not me. I'm not going to do that. Or I've done that and I felt that pain and others have too. So I'm not going to do that again. I need help. Who can I get help from? And now we're back to relationships. Who are the trusted people in our lives?
I love that when we talk about healing and restoration, it just always comes back to that part of like, how do you build relationships? How do you see the humanness that we have for one another that we kind of overlook, especially in this context, right? Because, no, you're right. Like there are some people that are beyond help in that sense. But most of the men that, you've spoken to at the point of arrest, our team has listened to those testimonies. They're fathers, they're people that are working at job sites right now. There are people that, are, doing labor out there somewhere, in some industry. They're everyday people. And I think that's something that our organization continues to want to kind of build on and kind of elaborate when we talk about our message of fighting the demand for human trafficking. Because if we can address the demand, if we can break down why some of these people get to that point of arrest, we can end trafficking in that sense. And we can end trafficking because if this one person has been healed and restored, they don't go and exploit. And when they were exploiting, they might be exploiting multiple times, right? So it's just kind of something that I think when I think about fighting demand, I've said this in a previous episode, fighting demand, it seems so intimidating, but really it's just about building that relationship, right? Like what if that guy that started off having a girl even, like let's talk about just, us as human beings. What if we're just, if that guy or that girl is, having a rough day at work and they're having, wings and a beer. But what if they're having wings and a beer with another guy? Mm-hmm. Like, what power is there in that scenario? Instead of having that man experience loneliness, experience multiple beers and wings by himself, and then turn to some of those contributing factors that we talked about.
Yeah. I was talking to our team member, Krista, about this the other day, and we were talking about relationships and how one of the things that is truly a deficit in our society is men being able to have a real conversation. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just true. I was telling her, a lot of times men, when we're talking, if we really stop and think about it, we're really competing. Like, I need to be funnier. I need to be faster. I need to know this. Or if he says a fact, I need to say, yeah, but I need to be yeah, but guy. Or I need to be bigger. I need to be stronger. I need to be whatever. And there's a competition in that interaction. And some of that's primal, right? I get that. But it also comes back to going into some default mode where we're not really connecting at all. We're not being human beings. And because of that, what I'm going to take from that conversation is I either won or I lost. And in either case, that's not really somebody I'm going to ever open up to.
Yeah.
I've always heard women are competitive, so it probably puts us to shame. But just, you asked me specifically about men. Imagine being in a circle of guys just in general, right? And oftentimes the conversations are going to be what guys talk about, whatever. Sometimes it's going to be even way beyond that, be extreme, whether it's sexual or whatever. And then imagine your conversations you have if you go to church in your life group with the guys that you're in. Let's say you're just in a men's group or whatever. Not everybody can relate to this, but I'm just going to use this example for now. Those are very different identities that you're carrying in each conversation probably. Or if not, if it's the same identity, the outcome, the way that you engage, that has some level, some degree of variance. Because you're talking with somebody else and you've got this common belief, whether it's your faith or something else. Sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's something that you share, and you're able to have this common mindset. And so maybe you're not as competitive and you can have a conversation with that person. If we can get to a point where we're not always on guard or always competing and have real conversations as men, some of the men in my life that I'm able to talk to about stuff, I never thought I'd be that guy who would say, man, this is hard, or I'm struggling with this. Can you pray for this? Whatever. But without them, I know who I was. I know how I was. I was never going to show anybody that I had a weakness or whatever. Right? I had to overcome it. I had to be louder. I had to be stronger. I had to be whatever. And it isolates you in a way that you can't stop yourself from. You've got to have some help. And so bringing that back to sort of the whole intervention idea that we were talking about alcohol, let's just finish in an intervention, shall we? That's where our programs come in. That's why we developed our programs. It's because we need to intervene, not just with somebody in a destructive process, but somebody in an everyday, normalized societal default, right?
Yeah.
You know, how you doing? Oh, we're doing all right. Oh, hardly working or working hard, or, all that garbage crap, whatever. None of that matters, right? It's just small talk. But if you're able to get deeper and you're able to get to a point where you connect with somebody on something that's important to them, that's what we're trying to do with our programs with somebody who's struggling or somebody who just wants to understand all of this better. So you have given our programs just an incredible amount of impact over the years. Is there a program that you think of that when you apply it the most, it comes back to what we're talking about? Not trafficking, but the contributing factors in somebody's life or a people group. When I talk about programs or an intervention in somebody's life that needs it, does one come to mind?
Yeah. I think for me specifically, it boils down to our workshops, our community impact workshops that we do with schools, churches, organizations, because it's still, I think at the end of the day, making those spaces where we can have those conversations, making those spaces where people can ask those uncomfortable questions. Mm-hmm. Because, I think about that child, right, where they have, unfortunately had an exposure to pornography. It makes such a difference if that child has a relationship at home with their parents that they can trust, where they can talk about this, versus if they didn't, if they're in a home where this is something that, we're not going to talk about, or this is something that, it's a little too personal to talk about. I think it's so important to have those spaces where we can build those relationships based off of some of these contributing factors that we're seeing in this issue specifically. My favorite, of course, is always being able to do defend home workshops because, I've seen the spectrum of vulnerable kids. From the teen victims I was a case manager for to the kids I taught when I was a classroom educator. Even now, working with parents, and we'll get a teen workshop here and there, and seeing teens engage with us and ask, is it really that problematic if I, post a picture of myself, at the gym with my shirt off, and it's just like, I love that we provide that space for them to be able to ask that question, for us to answer that question, and then for their parents to hear about it too. Because, when parents are, able to kind of see the world that their kids are growing up in these days, they can see more, I think, of those points of vulnerability, those potential points of exposure to illicit sexual online content. And, hopefully that could be a deterrent for, a child becoming an adult that would engage or find themselves as a part on our escalation dynamic.
Yeah. I think about the word content, and then I think about the word context. There's one letter difference, but content always needs context. And even if the content is your conversation with your kid who's saying, or they're in a workshop and you heard them tell somebody else, whatever, you've got to think, oh my God, don't just get freaked out by the content of what they said, but what's the context of why they said it? What's their reality? And that's why we talk about our trees, right? Like it's trust, realize where they're coming from, edify. I mean, there are ways to have conversations that can be absolutely mutual, which is hard for parents to do. I mean, I know you're not having a lot of trouble having conversations with Isaac right now. He's, I think, an hour and a half old? How old? I'm just kidding.
He's 6 weeks.
So he's 6 weeks old. There's not a lot of arguing going on. It's a lot of demands, basically.
Oh, yeah.
I'm hungry
sure.
right now. So that'll get old, I promise you. But when we think about actually having a mutual conversation and being able to have that trust, realization, empathy, edification, and then a shame-free conversation, to see it modeled in a workshop, I'm with you. Like when I see parents, you see it. Like you see them hear something and go, oh. And then you finish your point and they're like, oh, I just had that happen a week ago. And for me, what that is, sometimes we're not suffocating, but sometimes it feels like it because there's just so much that we run into that's awful.
Yeah.
And we want people to get beyond it. And when we see that, that's a deep breath for me. Like I'll be just like, right there, that person took something from this and can apply it. And that then can have a ripple effect within their family and from their family to the community, from the community and beyond that. I just think that's extremely, extremely powerful. So as I think about really our discussion today and just kind of wrapping it up, we don't talk about human trafficking, and we think that's the most direct way to fight human trafficking, the most effective way to really fight human trafficking and bring the discussion home so that it doesn't end up happening, because human trafficking is an effect and not a cause. And when we talk about causation and all the things we've touched on, they absolutely are existent in all of our lives. So what are some of the ways where we can bring this to our community? Like, what are some of the ways that this can be amplified beyond just a workshop or something else?
I think it comes to just this general awareness that we're hoping for our communities to grasp and understand, right? Like it's not beneficial. It's not good to be on the reactive side of things, right? We never want to be on the reactive side of things. When I think about the men that you speak to at the point of arrest, I often think about what conversations were missed, proactively. What conversations could be had in a church life group, or, in like a gym, or in like like playing basketball or something like that, right? Like, where were some of those missed conversations? I think it's about being vigilant and being aware and paying attention to what our generation is going through, and the younger generations, what they're growing up with, and being aware of those dangers and understanding them, and then also deciding for yourself, what is your game plan in your home? Game
plan's important.
Yeah.
Have a plan, have a goal.
Right. Like how will you as a family tackle this issue when it comes to your house? And pray that it doesn't, right? But more likely than not, it will come to your house.
And come to your house is naturally something you would do. That's just your natural word choice.
Yeah.
But I want those words to just hang in the air for a second for people that are watching this. If it comes to your house, there's no assignment of blame there. There's no vilification. There's no you're dirty, you're bad. It's probably coming to your house. And if it's not coming to your house, it's coming to somebody who lives in your house. Mm-hmm. And so indirectly or directly, it is coming to your house. So the preparation isn't a fear thing. It is just understanding that this is the world we live in. And by all the things you just said, by having that equipping and understanding, being prepared for it, it's unfortunate. We hate it. It's less scary. And there is a plan and there is support that comes from that. Like, I think about ways that we can invite other people into our lives, whether it's a mentor for ourselves as an adult or for our kids. Mm-hmm. Mentoring. I mean, one of our board members, Mandy Benedict's, I remember, it's 10 years ago, there was no mentoring program in Pearland ISD where I live. In a matter of 6 years, there were over 300 mentors. That's 300 people spending time with at least one kid, because a lot of mentors had multiple. At one point, I had 4 kids that I was mentoring. You're spending 30 minutes a day with them. And in that 30 minutes, they don't have any requirement. They don't have any sort of expectation really from you, because you're somebody who came to them and is spending time with them. And while these earth-shattering conversations were rare, they happened. And they happened because of all of the conversations that weren't earth-shattering, where we just kept showing up. And so to have that in your life or in your community, there's over 500 kids that are cared for right now in that mentorship program. And I have the honor of sometimes getting to present to those mentors and talk about the things we're talking about here. We've got another one coming up soon with a different school district. So those things, reaching into the community, having those contributing factors neutralized, identifying for what they are, calling them for what they are, because the rest of society is calling it something else. We call it what it is. We bring them back to their truth. We help people kind of understand that. And then as they go forward, they're not self-medicating for something that goes really untreated. They then are starting to understand, well, this is where the pain is. This is what hurts. And I have people in my life that care about me. And I know I'm worth being cared about. And then the work begins. That's the part that we can get to. I think it would be irresponsible to have this conversation in this depth and not do what we do in our workshops. And so I'm just going to say it directly to the camera. If you heard anything today and you felt like either for yourself or your family that you have a conflict, whether it's pornography, whatever it is, a relational issue, something in your house, something you're worried about, you can reach out to defender@demanddisruption.org. It's just the word defender@ourname.org. That's going to be discreet. You have our word on it. It's going to be paced. We're going to go at your pace. But we're also going to hope to understand how we can draw a map together back to who you are, what you're concerned about, and eliminate some of that. So we can do that work together. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about that as we talked about everything else. And then just anything else that you want to wrap us up with, Phuong?
Yeah, no, I think it's just at the end of the day, like just seeing people for where they are, no matter who you are. Like you can make a difference just simply by like seeing another person from where they are. I think for me, something that kind of just reminds me of a time where I feel seen was, I had a teacher who recognized I was going through a really difficult time. And it was very simple. Yes, please do join a mentorship program if there's one in your community.
If you don't have one, start one.
If you're in Pearland, please join Mandy Benedict's mentorship program, please.
And if not, call her and she will help you start one in your community.
Yes. But it's just feeling seen, right? Like the teacher that I had, she just saw some signs and just was realizing that I was having a difficult time. And she just pulled me aside and asked me, "Are you okay?" And I didn't really share with her too much about what was going on in my life at that time. But she was like, "Hey, I want you to do something." And then she gave me a little index card and she told me, "Write down, I will prevail."
Still today. You still feel it, don't you?
I do. Because recently going through a difficult season of life. Recently, I did that. Some things you carry with you, right? And so you just never know where you can make a difference. So
that's so awesome. Yeah, I don't have any tattoos, but I will soon because I lost my dad recently. But when I say dad, my aunt and uncle adopted me and my brother. And you mentioned that, and it reminds me of I was not a good student. I got by on whatever. But I did read Oliver Twist. And when I was done with it, I was like, I read that. I read the whole thing. And I thought Nancy's character was very interesting. My brain began to grow a little bit, I think. The woman who adopted me was an English teacher. And her kids went to Rice University, were great students. And then they adopted these two eating machine monsters, boys. I don't know what they were thinking. But I wrote down Conquered, and I put it on a sticky note on the book. And I came home that day, and the word conqueror was on that book.
That's sweet.
It's kind of the same thing. Yeah. All right, we're going to cut this before we start crying.
I know, right?
But that's a difference that can be made with connection.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, you guys, make connections. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Demand Disruption Podcast. We didn't realize we were going to need a box of tissues at the end of this.
Appreciate you opening that door.
But yeah, no, we're just so glad that you're here for this conversation and that you're here to listen and hear about our experiences, not only just as people working in anti-trafficking work, but also as human beings. And so thank you guys. Hope you'll join us for the next one.